natural balance of bone growth and repair is important in building bone density, what must also be considered is bone flexibility.
That's a very good question. A lot of people get caught up on the density. So you can make a bone dense, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's flexible. So if you have a dense, brittle bone, you have good density, but if you fall on that brittle bone, you'll still break the bone. So it isn't just about the density, and this is one of the things that I feel like in the alternative health field we've tried to stress this, that it's about the bone matrix as well, which gives it flexibility, because we want bones that will be more flexible and bending rather than brittle and snap. And so if we're only looking at densification, which is what happens with many of the drugs that are given for osteoporotic women, is that they're given a drug that densifies the bone. It will make them more dense, and their bone density test will look like it's improved, but it doesn't necessarily make them less brittle. And that's where I think things that we eat in our daily diet, the use of essential fatty acids and the use of other bone matrix supporting supplements such as boron and vitamin K and magnesium make a huge difference there.
Our first approach to health maintenance should always be to align ourselves with the laws of nature, meaning we should look to our foods and what we eat.
Absolutely. I think there are two main things to think about with diet, as those foods that actually work against the bone, so they're detrimental to the bone, that cause leaching and breakdown of the bone, and then those foods that are pro-bone, either pro in the sense that they're nutrients that are used in building bone, or they're a substance that helps to get the calcium or the minerals into the bone itself. One thing that's very interesting is many people focus in on calcium, and for many years we believed that calcium was the main supplement to be focusing on. And so we've seen a trend of higher and higher amounts of calcium going in, particularly in supplementation, and not necessarily improvement in bone. And there's, certainly some cautions about high amounts of calcium. At the same time, we've also seen a trend that looking at the types of calcium people take and what calcium ends up in the bones the best are the calciums that we get from foods. So it takes us back to some of the basic food groups that we would be using for calcium. Of course, we have calcium supplemented foods or fortified foods, so that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a natural calcium in the food. That means it's been supplemented, so it's going to act more like a supplement than a food. But if you look at food groups for calcium, now everyone thinks about dairy, and dairy is a good food group for calcium, but things like almonds and tofu and greens and seaweed have much more, and even corn tortillas in a good serving will have equal, if not more, calcium than dairy does. So if you're a person who can't eat dairy products, it doesn't mean that you can't find calcium in your diet. You can find it through sesame and through other types of nuts, all your greens, your seaweeds, your lime, your corn molasses. There's a lot of places to get calcium. And the more variety of calcium we can have in our diet, the better our bones have to use that building block. So I really try to push people to get 300 to 350 milligrams of calcium out of their diet each day. And then if they're going to be supplementing above and beyond that, that's fine. But to first get it from the foods that we eat day in and day out.
Conventional wisdom holds that dairy foods are the best source of calcium, and that Americans should drink lots of milk to get the large amount of calcium their bodies need every day. Studies, however, seem to find no link between dairy-sourced calcium and strong bones.
Well, my question there would be, are we talking about dairy products that are natural dairy products, or are we talking about dairy products that have been processed to put on our shelf? When we get into pasteurization and homogenation, we end up changing the structures of a lot of our foods, and particularly changing some of the protein structures, which mean that we don't necessarily get everything that the food has in it. So we can look scientifically and say that there's this much calcium in these dairy products, but if the products have then been switched around and changed so that they have long shelf life or so forth, we may not be able to actually get that calcium out. A good mixture of animal product with leafy greens or plant product for calcium, I think, is really the best way to go, so that you're not depending just on dairy. Because you'll be limiting your source of calcium, and the more multiple sources we have, the better our body can work with those different building blocks.
If you do not get enough calcium, or if your body does not absorb enough calcium from your diet, then bone production and bone tissues may suffer. This can result in brittle, fragile bones that are more prone to fractures. I receive countless calls from women trying to solve the riddle of how to best get 12 to 1500 milligrams of calcium as prescribed by their doctors.
And calcium supplements range out there, not only to how much you're going to take, but the types of calcium. And I'm very picky about it. I really don't see a reason to be taking types of calcium that can't be utilized in our bones. And yet it's cheap on the market, and a lot of people put it out there on the market because it's easy, but we don't necessarily use it. Many times calcium carbonate you have to have a lot of that calcium in your body to use a little bit of it. So they recommend higher amounts of it. I cringe when I hear people taking over 1,000 milligrams. If they're an osteoporotic client, I would probably have them on 1,000 milligrams in relationship to the magnesium they take, the manganese, the vitamin K, and the boron. So my preference would be a supplement that's made from calcium in its natural food state. And in that way, we're going to get the types of calcium that are more apt to find their way to the tissues that we want. But it's not just the calcium, it's also the magnesium. And I think magnesium is very important because you can have all the calcium you want, but nobody opens the door if the magnesium isn't there. So magnesium is going to help open the door and usher the calcium to the place where it's going to get utilized. And many times what we see in supplements are magnesium oxide. And when someone brings that into my office, I open the cover and I dump it in the wastebasket right in front of them, tell them, this is what you just did with your money. Because it is as good as waste from the wastebasket. So I stay way away from magnesium oxide or any oxide form of mineral.